A disclaimer before we begin, so you know where I'm coming from. My experience with Fromsoft games prior to Elden Ring amounted to a few hours of Dark Souls 2. A friend of mine was really into Dark Souls and insisted I try it. But I had not heard good things about its Steam port, so for some reason I got Dark Souls 2 instead of Dark Souls 1, because for some reason I assumed it wouldn't have the same problems. Don't ask me why I thought that. I flailed about for several hours, not knowing how to build my character, or where the hell I was going, or why. The only bosses I believe I beat were the Last Giant, and whatever that knight guy in that tower by the ocean was. I don't remember if I beat the Pursuer or not, and I know I didn't beat anything else. I quit, frustrated, and never went back after that day. I wrote the series off as what I originally thought it was: cryptic, obtuse, masochistic horse shit for tryhards. Even I, however, could not put off trying Elden Ring forever, when even people who, like me, didn't like Dark Souls were out there saying it was one of the greatest games of all time. Indeed, I could well see the complaining of From veterans that the game was supposedly more noob and casual friendly, that the masochism the games were known for had been thrown out, and Elden Ring was a betrayal of the fan base. And that made me genuinely interested in seeing if this was true. So several months ago, I caved and bought Elden Ring. I played through the entire game, ultimately sinking 177 hours into that first playthrough, far more than the 100 I had been told to expect. As it has for many, my first real experience of a From game has proved to be an important moment in my history of playing games, so I feel the need to talk about it. If you just want the through line, here it is. This is one of the greatest games I've ever played. It's going right up there with Deus Ex and Halo. It has an extremely addictive gameplay loop, and is one of the few games in existence that can naturally induce the player to explore the game world. It is both an aesthetic and gameplay spectacle, an epic quest, and by the end, I really do feel like the demigod I've been striving to be for the entire game. But no game is perfect, and this is no exception. Just because From has gotten away with certain bad game elements in the past does not mean I will give them a pass on it. Not only am I not inherently inclined to be charitable, but as I have not played their other games, only heard things, I have not become used to it, and thus become some kind of broken coper, much like how Destiny addicts refuse to accept how grindy and horrible their game is to new players and insist that it's their fault for not liking the game. It's because the game demonstrates such design skill in most of its elements that I feel I must criticize fiercely those parts that do not measure up to the same height. Before we get to that, let's go over the good parts, shall we? By far, the two greatest elements of Elden Ring are character building and exploring the game world. The lands between are absolutely gorgeous as a series of locations. Epic in scale and spectacle. At every turn, the landscape reminds you that you are in a fantastic world of fantastic things, literally beckoning you visually to venture into it to uncover its secrets and see its most spectacular features up close. Nothing quite compares to staring back at Liurnia, Limgrave, and Caelid from Leyndell, seeing everything below disappear as you ride into the mountaintops, or look down at a given area from atop its divine tower as solemn, wondrous bells toll. Combine that with the evasive map design, as I'll put it, which sets out many tiered paths to travel, but where destinations, and often entrances, are obscured from view, requiring traversal and inquisition to uncover, makes the game an endless quest for discovery. For every few dead ends, there is a hidden cave, a secluded grove, a lost treasure just out of view, but from the right angle or position. The intricacy of the level design, from the tightest castle dungeons to the vast expanse of Liurnia's lake, is frankly unparalleled. I struggle to think of a game that is comparable. The continual intrigue is what makes it so easy to sink 100 hours into this game without ever getting bored. The sheer quantity and variety of things, both practical and spectacular to find, is astounding. This vastness also facilitates the game's gargantuan quantity of items that can, along with the level allotment, facilitate any number of builds far greater than not only, from what I understand, their previous games, but pretty much any other ARPG. The sheer variety of consumables, craftables, skills, summons, spells, armors, weapons, means it is virtually impossible to not find a style that fits you. You can construct builds around every type of weapon, every type of spell, every kind of item, as well as individual members of each category. Before I was even done my first playthrough, I was imagining what other builds I should try afterwards. My first character was a straightforward int wizard, so picked because I knew many in the community detest sorcery, and I am nothing if not spiteful. Although it was a genuine debate, I spent quite a bit of time pondering whether I should do int or faith for my first playthrough. So naturally, before I was even done the first one, I was like, I gotta do another playthrough, and it's gotta be a faith build. What type I didn't know at the time, but it has to be one. So I had all these ideas for how to play the game in my head, like an arc dragon communing barbarian thing, or like a lightning throwing knight, or a black flame assassin type. So I began a second playthrough immediately. The very day I finished my first playthrough, I started another one. I know these games seem to attract melee-only strength purist types, which explains why so many of them think Sekiro and or Bloodborne are From's best games. But Elden Ring is an ARPG through and through, and has the variety that comes with it. It will be very, very easy for me to sink hundreds of hours into this game. I can only imagine the people who say they never want to play Elden Ring again after their first playthrough either have only one preferred build and thus have no reason to replay it, or have played all of From's previous games, making Elden Ring a sort of overdose, given it's the size of several of their previous games put together. So it's just a bunch of something that they've kind of already played a lot of. Now, I know it's become a reactionary meme at this point to downplay the game's difficulty, to say it's the easiest From game, it's too cheesable, or From games aren't actually that hard, and it's all overblown in the first place. In an absolute sense, the latter is correct. Why From games in particular get this reputation is a little strange. I was just playing Dishonored, and on the hardest difficulty, you die in 2 hits, 3 if you have health upgrades, which massively lowers the margin for error. You either need to be good at stealth, so you aren't ever in a position to get hit, or you need to be very fast acting in combat. I suppose the reason is due to their games being ARPGs, which means not only are you fighting numerous boss enemies with spongy health bars, but you're also going to get compared to other ARPGs. As such, people can clearly see the difference between the third-person, mechanics-driven combat designed around dueling a single boss or a small pack of trash mobs found here, and a traditional, like, Diablo 2 clone, where you literally just click on things and they die, from a bird's eye view, cutting through trash by the hundreds per minute, and being more about stat mashing, demanding far less mechanical combat input from the player beyond clicking and playing their ability keys like a piano. What makes From bosses so notorious, ultimately, is the higher mechanical skill required from the player. Due to their expectedly beefy HP bars, you have to fight them for an extended period of time to defeat them. But they can kill you so quickly, your margin for error at any given time is very low. It demands the player consistently fight each boss without much error for much longer than games with such low player survivability usually demand. In fact, the best comparison I can come up with off the top of my head is another game I played recently, Alien Isolation, where you're stuck in a level, or, well, some of the levels, with an unkillable AI opponent that you must avoid alerting for many minutes on end while still navigating the level. Because if it catches you, it instantly kills you. Now, it's testing totally different skills, but the principle is the same. It's checking your skill at the game by asking you to execute a gameplay loop for an extended period with little to no error. This is in contrast to many games which are easier or casual by only asking you to execute a gameplay loop for a very short period of time or with a very generous margin of error. Think of a Bethesda game, which at this point is just a shittier version of something like Elden Ring. Take Skyrim. You are essentially unkillable. Whenever you take any significant damage, if your buffed up armor doesn't trivialize it already, you can instantly regen several hundred health with a high level healing spell. Or even more trivially, pause the game and instantly down enough health potions to negate the damage totally, making you effectively unkillable so long as you have enough potions, which you will because they're everywhere. So while I wouldn't say Elden Ring is any special category of difficult, it is certainly more difficult than most other games in its genre. Now granted, if you're overleveled or underleveled, this skill check breaks, and you either stomp the enemy because your numbers are too high, or get crushed because your numbers are too low to make victory possible without perfect play, which people do make challenge runs out of doing. Level run runs are like the go-to challenge run, but it's completely unrealistic to expect most people to be able to do that. But the only alternative is to implement level scaling, which is usually a really bad idea. You can make it work, I think, but it does come with trade-offs. So I don't really have a problem with the fixed levels of areas in this game. Now, you could take the argument that some of the level scaling is a bit off. Like, if I do Limgrave and then run into Caelid, how am I supposed to know that it's too high level, rather than it's just that hard because it's a From game? But it's pretty obvious, because if you try going to Liurnia, you should be able to see that, oh, things die here way easier. So, assuming you take the hint, and admittedly, I didn't, but it was more out of stubbornness than not realizing. My only real issue with the game's level progression is Dragon Barrow. It makes no sense whatsoever that this is an endgame area. It is integral to Caelid. The whole reason you go to Caelid is to get Radahn's rune and the other half of the Grand Lift Medallion. You have to enter Dragon Barrow to get the medallion piece, and to activate Radahn's rune, because the Divine Tower is next to Dragon Barrow. Doing it later is, like, out of order. It doesn't really make sense. Now, none of this is to say there aren't problems with the game's difficulty. They simply can't be generalized to too easy or too hard. That's not granular enough. For instance, one of my biggest pet peeves is the lack of collision on many enemy attacks, which allows them to hit the player through solid objects that the player's own attacks can't. This will never feel fair. This is just horse shit, resulting from lazy animation and AI design, and not wanting to have to program each enemy to account for all such obstacles. There's no excuse for it. It shouldn't be in the game, and is probably my biggest issue with how combat in this game functions. Fix your shit, From. Another, and one many have pointed out, is how limited the AI is in general. It simply is not, in most cases, designed to deal with a player that doesn't engage with it in a melee duel. Many bosses can't handle being hit with ranged attacks, and can only deal with one opponent at once, allowing summons to act as free aggro sponges, while you gouge the boss's health. The people who decry that magic and summons make the game too easy aren't wrong per se, but their criticism is usually misplaced and comes from a pre-existing disdain at people who don't engage with what is considered the core Fromsoft gameplay loop, melee duels. What they should actually be doing is demanding that From stop being so fucking lazy and program the AI to be able to handle these threats. Give them better options for avoiding ranged attacks. Some enemies already can, but many are still sitting ducks. Make them constantly gap closed, so that ranged players really do have to kite them properly. And most importantly, have them prioritize the player in combat. The AI shouldn't engage with summons unless they're physically in the way. Otherwise, they should always be aggroed to the player, not the summon. A change that simple would be enough to make summons balanced. Hell, you could even buff their damage, since at that point they're more a damage supplement than an extra health bar or a distraction. This is not a complex change, and is far, far better than From's existing attempt to compensate by having us fight multiple bosses at once that aren't designed to be so. Whoever thought that sticking two pumpkin heads in a tiny room together, where they both wail on you out of sync with each other, leaving you, like, no openings to attack them, or 3 fucking Crystallians to the same effect, should be fired. Even if it was Miyazaki himself. This shit is so obviously both lazy and a bad idea. Oh, fucking Godskin duo, don't get me started. I don't understand why any of these cancerous gank fights are in the game. I don't even have a problem with the repeated bosses, aside from, like, Estelle, which I feel cheapens the build-up and novelty of the first one, or Godfroy, which is literally just Godric with a different name. But not within the same fucking arena. Hell, the watchdog with the 4 imp gank squad on the Weeping Peninsula, that just feels like intentional cruelty towards new players, frankly. You could axe all these trash copy-paste jobs from the game, and nothing of value would be lost. Now, as for the unique fights, while some are obviously better than others, for the record, my favorite boss is Placidus Axe, there are only 2 I consider bullshit. That is to say, there is some element of them that is unreasonable to expect the player to deal with. And I think you know where this is going. For context, the 3 hardest fights I had in this game were Malekith, Radagon and the Elden Beast, and Melania. Even with what many would consider an easy mode int build with a +10 Mimic, a +10 Moonveil, +10 Lusat Staff, Comet Azure, Night Comet, the whole shebang, it still took my stupid ass over an hour to beat Malekith, over 3 hours to beat Radagon and the Elden Beast, and over 4 hours to beat Melania. In terms of mechanical skill, I cannot and will not claim to be proficient. So I hope that lends credibility to my saying that there's only 2 bosses I really have a problem with. Everyone else, as far as I can tell, is playing fair, except for the aforementioned stupid copy-pasted gank fights, which are bad from a conceptual standpoint, and the enemy attacks clipping through walls shit, which is more of a general problem. The lesser of the 2 is the Elden Beast's Elden Stars. It's nearly dodgeable. You can dodge the main orb, but the little ones shooting off, you can't. Now, in principle, this is the same as Mohg's unavoidable attack, in that it's meant to drain your healing resources so you have less of a margin of error than you normally would. And that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. The problem is, you have to do it while it's also doing a bunch of other attacks, so it's an easy fail point. And the problem is that the Elden Beast fight is already so fucking tedious because of the fact that you don't have Torrent for some fucking reason, so you have to constantly run after it while dodging its attacks. It's very tedious, so adding an easy fail point like this into the fight just makes it aggravating. Because if, while you're trying to dodge this fucking thing, you get hit by one of its other attacks and die, or you fail to dodge it, and it kills you, you gotta fucking fight Radagon again, and then make another attempt at the Elden Beast. So it's less the attack itself is inherently bullshit, and more that it takes a tedious fight and makes it aggravating. For no reason. So one of two things need to change about the Elden Beast fight. They either need to get rid of Elden Stars, or they need to give you Torrent. My preference is that they give you Torrent, because that would improve the fight overall, instead of just making it tedious rather than aggravating. I have no idea why you don't get Torrent in the final fight, but you should. The boss I really have a problem with is Melania. Specifically, the first phase of Waterfowl Dance. The rest of the move can be dodged, but the first phase can't. Not within reason. Don't fucking at me with clips of people dodging Waterfowl Phase 1. I know it's possible, but the timing on it is frame perfect, which just isn't reasonable to ask almost anyone to be able to do. You can also avoid it with Bloodhound Step, but I am deeply uncomfortable with the idea of having bosses require specific items or builds to defeat. Easier or harder, depending on your build, sure. But I shouldn't need a specific Ash of War from one specific Knight's Cavalry that it's entirely possible the player will never know exists because it only appears at night in an unusually over-leveled area, meaning the player may have avoided it entirely, in order to not get RNG nuked by Waterfowl Dance. That kind of design encourages metagaming and penalizes build diversity, which the game is otherwise excellent at. The puzzle of the bosses in this game should be how I can use my build to work around the boss's moveset, not what particular fucking Ash of War, out of all the ashes, spells, weapons, and other items, might allow me to avoid an otherwise unavoidable attack in one specific boss fight. It's the opposite of the freeform game design present in the rest of the game, and therefore should be removed as incongruous. Other than those, I see nothing unfair. Again, aside from the gank fights and the attacks clipping through objects, the rest of it seems to be fair, right? Like my struggle with Malekith, for instance, that's entirely my fault. That's because my reaction time is garbage, not him being unfair. I do want, for a second, to go back to talking about asset reuse, though. While I usually don't have a problem with this, save for things that should be unique, like Astel or Godric, in the late game, it's a symptom of sloppy design in general in this game, specifically. Mountaintops of the Giants and consecrated snowfields, especially snowfields, clearly got the short end of the development stick, because both, again, especially the snowfields, lack many exploration rewards, or really much to find in general, are largely empty, and the enemies that do exist there are copy-pasted from other areas of the game in extremely lazy ways. Seeing random high-level enemies plopped in the middle of open fields, guarding nothing, giving the player no reason to engage with them, is quite common. Mountaintops at least looks interesting, even if it isn't filled with anything interesting to actually do. But Snowfield is literally just a giant open tract of snow dotted with random rocks and enemies. Mountaintops needs to exist from a story perspective, but Snowfield is just padding, pure and simple, and should be cut out of the game entirely. Adding the few things to find from Snowfield to Mountaintops wouldn't fix Mountaintops being overly linear, nor entirely fix its sparseness, but it would at least help. Hell, even if Mountaintops had to be halved in size, or some other area, like Liurnia or Altus, had to be made smaller, in order to devote the development time needed to make mountaintops as fleshed out as the rest of the game, it would be worth it because of mountaintops' importance to the quest. And finally, we come to my biggest problem with this game. Its refusal to explain itself. Its unnecessary obtuseness. Its hostility towards informing the player, or even making sense. I don't even need to make a separate part about the game being hostile to new players, because that's a necessary consequence of this. Let me tell you a little story. When I started this game, I looked right at the Tree Sentinel and figured, that looks like a higher level enemy than I'm equipped to handle. And I was right. I even correctly surmised this was the game telling me to not just beeline it to Stormveil and expect victory, though I did make a few pathetic attempts to kill him first, just to check. However, it turns out I came to this conclusion too early. While you aren't supposed to fight the Tree Sentinel, you are supposed to head towards Stormveil anyway, because if you don't, both crafting and spirit summoning, accessed via the church behind the Tree Sentinel, are unobtainable. You can do as much of the rest of Limgrave as you want. Hell, you could go to fucking Caelid. But if you don't go to that church, two fundamental game mechanics, and you know they're fundamental because they have their own dedicated UI tabs, are just gone. You can never craft a single item, you can never summon a single helper. But since, for the first 60 hours or so, I tried to do this game blind, because everyone always says that it's best done blind, I had no idea my access to these things lay just behind that enemy I was avoiding until I was higher level. I did eventually come back and kill the Tree Sentinel, after doing most of the rest of Limgrave. Only then did I finally step foot in that church and find Kale selling the only crafting kit in the entire game. This is just absurd design, to lock this behind interacting with one particular merchant. It's absolutely ridiculous. I can collect as many materials as I want, level as high as I want, collect as many pots as I want, and visit as many other merchants as I want. But so long as I don't go to Kale specifically, I can never craft a single thing. It's like they just assumed everyone would go to the church right off the bat, and absolutely no contingency was put in place if you chose to do otherwise. And indeed, there is the fundamental problem. A lack of robustness in the game's triggers. The hyperspecificity of the criteria that must be met to trigger events and quest steps and the like. And it applies to both items, not just the crafting kit. To get the spirit calling bell, this is even more obtuse. You must fast travel to the site of grace at that church, specifically. Ronnie will never appear anywhere else via any other method. So if, as I did, you finally get to Kale, you clear out everything you want to buy from his inventory in one go, and never go back again, because why would I? You can't get the bell, and can never summon anything. Now, I have read, I can't confirm this, but I have read that eventually, presumably when you meet Ronnie in person or upon entering Liurnia, I don't know, I can't find any actual information about this, the bell does eventually appear in the Twin Husks inventory. But you could be dozens and dozens of hours into the game by then. I myself only got it when, while going through Caelid, I still hadn't been to Stormveil. I was doing this stubborn thing where I was going to do everything except Stormveil and then do Stormveil. I needed smithing stones, but I didn't remember which merchants I had found sold them. I just knew that one of them had them. And since this was still early enough in the game that teleporting around checking all the merchants' inventories instead of just looking them up, because again I wasn't doing that, wasn't tedious yet, so I did that. I went teleporting around to check everyone's inventory to see who had the smithing stones. Now, thank fuck, I didn't by chance go to the one I was looking for before double-checking Kale, who I was pretty sure didn't have smithing stones, but, you know, I've been known to miss blatantly obvious things, so I decided to double-check him, and, of course, when I did that, Ronnie appeared. And I got my spirit calling bell. Because otherwise, I could have done the entirety of Limgrave, and Caelid, and maybe even a large part of Liurnia before I was ever able to summon anything. As it was, I only had to go without it for about 40 hours, which is still unacceptable and dumb, but I guess it's better than 80. But believe it or not, that's not the worst example. Oh no. See, before any of that, before I even completed Limgrave, I met the teleporter chest. Evidently, given what I've just said, From thought it was unlikely I would stumble onto this immediately, but I'm not sure why. He put the tree sentinel in front of me, a troll and land octopuses to my left, so I'm gonna try going to the right, down to the lake. Yes, there's a dragon down there, but I didn't know that yet. Which I did. So I got teleported to Caelid. This action, given you can't teleport away, seems to just be a sadistic joke on the developer's part. Remember, I'm level 1 at this point. There's no good justification for doing this aside from our games are hard for hardcore gamers, lol, and therefore that justifies sadistic game design like this. So after dozens of attempts to find my way up and out of the mine, because counterintuitively, the entrance is actually located by going down from where you're teleported to, not up, because it's in a cliffside, but of course I didn't know that because I'd never been there yet. It was only after accepted I didn't have enough mana to be able to kill everything going up that I tried going the other way, and then it turned out that was the way I was supposed to go the entire time. Now, once I got there, I could teleport away, but I felt so absolutely insulted by the game at that point. I decided, you know what, if you have the goal to teleport me here, I'm not going to do what you want, because you're clearly designing this to make it so that, oh, look, this is too high level for you, we're going to torch you with it for a little while, and then you're going to run away like a bitch, and you're going to have to come back later. I decided, no, I'm doing Caelid right now. I'm doing it right now. And for about 10 hours, that's exactly what I did. I played Caelid first, not Limgrave. But you want to know something funny? Other than finding an incantation I couldn't use, and never ended up using, the Meteor Blade, which was a good find, and the teleporter gate to the Divine Bridge, those 10 hours were a complete and total waste of time. Because I could not level up. All the runes from the enemies I killed, I avoided all the bosses because obviously I couldn't kill them, I lost. I made no progress whatsoever aside from knowing the lay of the land when I came back to actually clear Caelid later. That's absurd, you say. Are you blind? Could you not see the level up option right there at the grace menu? No, I couldn't. Because it wasn't there. You see, unbeknownst to me, until I returned to Limgrave, I found a second stone sword key and went back to the starting building to unlock that chariot dungeon before I forgot about it because I knew that if I left it for later I would forget about it. Melina's appearance, and thus your ability to level up, is tied to Limgrave. You must activate 3 graces in Limgrave for her to appear. Even though you can access both Caelid, and if you're really stretching believability, Liurnia and Altus at this point, only graces in Limgrave count towards this trigger. So no matter how many graces on the rest of the map you activate, Melina will never appear. It was only after returning to Limgrave, a dozen hours in, and trying to work my way back towards the last point I was at in Caelid, because I'd actually almost made it to the church at the edge, that she finally appeared for me. Me banging my head against the wall in Caelid, out of pure stubbornness and spite, that's my fault, okay? Me struggling with that, obviously that's my own fault. I didn't have to do that. I chose to do that. But there is no excuse other than either stupidity, i.e. they just didn't remember that you could go anywhere other than Limgrave, or sadism. They did and chose to not make any other graces count. It should not be physically possible, nor does it make any fucking narrative sense, frankly, for me to activate half the graces in Caelid and never have Melina appear. Unacceptable horse shit. And this kind of crap permeates every quest in this game. Did you know Millicent had a quest line? I didn't. I never saw her again after summoning her to fight the magma worm. I don't know if she wasn't at her first spawn point in Altus because I broke that trigger, whether I just missed her. But it doesn't matter because even if I had, I would have missed her anyway. She won't appear at the Grace atop the Windmill Village unless you rest at that Grace, which I didn't because I didn't want to respawn all the shit I had killed on the way up there. So boom, just like that, questline over. Don't sit at a specific Grace site, quest over. No other option. Same thing with Ronnie, but worse. She disappears, doesn't tell you where she's going, and when I take the teleporter, I end up at a place I've already been. Ansel Rivermain. So I go, okay, I guess this is telling me that she's down here. Where would she be? Well, the end of this series of dungeons is Astel, who I've already killed. And there is a sealed gate at the end there. So maybe Ronnie is back there. And I've sort of jumped ahead in this questline. So I go check that barrier at the end of Astel's boss room. She's not there. Okay. Something else must trigger her, or maybe she's somewhere else in the level. She could be somewhere else in the level, but I don't give a shit enough to scour the rest of the dungeon again to check for where she might be. So I was like, okay, I'm out. And boom. Just like that, her quest line is now over. If you don't sit at the nearby Grace after teleporting there, and then try to talk to the doll 3 times, and why would you assume that repeatedly talking to the doll would eventually get her to talk to you, rather than assuming that you can't talk to it because of some other criteria you haven't met, you can't continue her quest, or get her ending. Hell, even if I'd never been there before, all I'd have to do to miss it is not rest there, because I didn't need to. Fia I could also have missed, since she doesn't say where she's going either, had I not given up by that point and started wikiing everything. But this insultingly obtuse quest design was so offensive to me, I refused to do Ronnie or Fia's quest lines, even after I looked up how to do them. Fia's you might be able to intuit, after all, your intuition is rewarded, like giving Celovus's draft to Gideon, for instance, but Ronnie's is far too specific. It would be sheer luck if you stumble upon the next quest step. And quite frankly, if From either by negligence or intent is so hell-bent on keeping me from completing these quests, I don't care to engage with them. The only one that progresses naturally is Corrin's, and even then, it's stupidly easy to miss the very end of it. Because exploring the ruins of Lanedale is largely pointless, except for finding Gold Mask's rune. So if you guess that trying to explore Lanedale at that point is a waste of time, which, except for Gold Mask's rune, it is, you can miss the reward for that questline right at the end of it. Hell, let's say I wanted to do the Frenzied Flame ending. How the fuck am I supposed to know to take my clothes off to get the door to open? If you don't do Hyetta's quest, which is also easy, you just have to miss one of her appearances, because she doesn't tell you where she's going. There's no indication that you have to do that. And Hyetta's actual dialogue doesn't specifically say that's what you have to do. Divesting yourself of your possessions could mean anything from throwing away your equipped items to junking your entire inventory. Like, what does that mean? And if you guess anything than specifically taking your armor off, nothing will happen. Everything seems to be designed to prevent you from accessing anything but the default ending without looking it up, or stumbling on it by chance. Similar in philosophy to the fucking illusory walls, and I'm just gonna say it. Fuck those things. There is no natural way to find them. 99.99% of them are not hinted at all. So the only way to find them is to either look them up, or whack every section of every wall in the game to make sure you find them. Unless you're looking everything up, you're not gonna find them. Unless someone happens to put a message down in front of it, and you don't ignore the message because 99% of such messages are lies. And you know what, From? That's fine. You want to hide parts of your game from anyone that hasn't spoiled the entire thing already by reading the wiki? Fine. I'll play as if they don't exist. But then, I get to shit on Selen's quest for not being finished, since you can't complete it without getting past invisible walls that are impossible to find without looking them up. As if the fact that you can find her chained up on the Weeping Peninsula but can't do anything about it until you progress her questline wasn't bad enough. And several of your dungeons are incomplete, because half of them are hidden behind illusory walls. And also, that you're forced into doing Volcano Manor's questline, even though you have no real reason to do so unless you're actively evil. Because there is no hint whatsoever at the existence of the invisible wall that blocks access to the rest of the manor. And, by the way, why exactly can't you just barge in and kill everyone on sight? From seems to have thought that everyone would want to join Volcano Manor for some reason, which doesn't make any sense, given who you are, given the fact that under normal circumstances they'd want you dead, especially if you didn't help Raya, so what? Anyway, your character isn't spared from this crap either. Oh no. Why the fuck do item descriptions contain no numbers? Why doesn't, Lusat's staff tell me what its damage boost and mana penalties are? Any item that has an effect which is not represented by a change in either weapon damage in the central stat panel or a stat in the right side panel is unknowable without looking it up. Why? There is no reason for this. Same with spells. Weapons have specific damage stats shown in the central panel. Spells and items have none. The only way to know is to fire it at an enemy that doesn't have any resistance to that damage type, which is also guesswork without looking it up, and looking at the damage you do. Why? Why is it like this? Why doesn't the Blasphemous Claw actually tell you what it does? Why doesn't any of this shit have a straightforward description? And it's not just items either. Your fucking character's stats are also practically hidden behind a veil of bullshit. Why do soft caps even exist in this game? Why, if it's not worth leveling Vigor past 60, say, why can you even do it? What's the point? Why even let you level it up to 99 if there's no point in doing it? But that you can at least see. Like, you can see that going to level 61 Vigor only gives you 6 HP. So you can see, oh, it's probably not worth it. But nothing tells you that Vigor scaling ramps up prior to level 41. And that investing in it pays off if you just put 10 levels in or something. Same thing with Mind, which levels so minusculely at first, it looks like a worthless stat. Why stats don't scale linearly, I don't understand. Again, it seems like From just assumes you'll look everything up before you even play. Which, given that Ronnie's ending is the most popular, seems to be something everyone does. And it's just considered normal or acceptable for some reason. Thank God you can respec, or it would be stupidly, horrendously easy to completely fuck up your build. If you go in blind, not knowing how each stat scales, or hell, how each weapon scales. The only way to know if the new weapon you picked up will end up better than the plus 10 weapon you're already using without looking it up is to either spend the stones to see, and if you run out from doing this, lucky you, get fucked, or write down the initial scaling of every weapon you pick up, because the game does not show a weapon's starting or max scaling for, again, no discernible reason. So it might seem that anyone who tells you that From games are best played blind are fucking lying. They're trying to make your first time through a horrendous experience. But on the other hand, they're not actually lying. Because see, if you want to make playing the game easier, if you want to know how all the weapons work, what they all do, what all the talismans do, what all the spells do, what triggers each quest step, if you look all that up, it's basically inevitable that you're going to spoil a game. And also, you just inherently now know where all these items are and where they can be found, and all the locations they're found in. So, If you do that in order to make playing the game moment to moment, mechanically, easier on yourself, you spoil the game. So now, there's no emotional payoff from exploring the game world, because you already know what you're going to find. And you already know that all of these hidden places exist. You already know that Estelle exists. You already know the Lake of Rot exists. You already know that Malekith exists. You already know that Radagon and the Elden Beast exist. You already know everything. There's no sense of wonder or emotional payoff from exploring the world and finding new and amazing things, because you already know it exists, because you had to look it up in order to know how it worked. So if you don't go in blind, you don't get the satisfaction from exploring Elden Ring. So you do genuinely lose a huge part of the game's experience, especially on a first playthrough, if you look up everything that the game doesn't explain. But if you don't, you'll be in a position where you're just flailing about, not knowing how anything works, because the game refuses to explain itself. And thus, your time playing the game is made more frustrating and harder than it needs to be, because the game won't explain itself to you, and in order to not spoil it, you're not looking any of it up. So you can't have both. Even though this game is excellent, for the most part, both from a gameplay standpoint, as in a mechanical combat standpoint, and a character building standpoint, and especially from a world design and exploration standpoint, you can't have all of it at the same time. If you want combat and character building to be as enjoyable as possible, and if you want to be able to do basically any of the quests, you have to look it up, because the game refuses to explain how half of its systems work, how many of its items work, and the criteria for triggering quest steps and events is ridiculously and nonsensically obtuse. If you do that, it makes those elements of the game smooth sailing and very enjoyable. But it means that the payoff of seeing and exploring the world and not knowing what's going to happen next and not knowing what you're going to find is all thrown out the window, because now you know about all of it. So you got to pick. Do you want an easier time playing the game or a more rewarding time exploring the game? You can't have both. There's no reason it has to be like this. There's no reason that the game can't just fucking explain itself so you don't have to look things up, but it doesn't. And it's a goddamn shame. As a parting bit, I'll comment on the narrative. 99% of the supposed story and lore is just video essayist headcanon, with little justification beyond speculation. What is Mohg's plan? Why does he want to hand the place over to the Mother of Truth? What is the Mother of Truth, even? Who knows? It's not stated. What's up with the Rot God? Again, who knows? Why does Marika want, as Gideon says, for us to struggle unto eternity? Why does she hate death? Why did she shatter the Elden Ring? Who knows? She never speaks a word about it. Why does Radagon even exist? Who knows? Why does the Elden Beast exist? Who knows? What is Placidusax's plan exactly? Who knows? What is the Greater Will's plan beyond telling you to kill everyone? Who knows? The game doesn't fucking explain any of it. The only thing I know for sure are the main events. I kill the Shardbearers, take their shards to the Erd Tree, and reforge the Elden Ring. Though even that doesn't entirely make sense, because you don't have to gather all the shards to reforge it, which... What? And what the hell are the exact consequences of the Elden Lord endings? Who knows? Here's a copy-pasted cutscene. It's evident from doesn't care anyway, because only Ronnie's ending and the Chaos ending have unique cutscenes without copy-pasted narration, and are clearly their preferred endings. Which is also insulting to those of us, like me, who don't like either of them. The only part of the story that actually works is the arc of your character. After all the shit you go through, all the places you go, the foes you fell, the powers you gain, for possibly over 100 hours, it really does feel like a natural conclusion that you smite the Elden Ring itself, a celestial entity, i.e. the Elden Beast, and hold the fate of this realm in your hands alone. It's actually why I prefer the Elden Lord endings. Because you are taking charge of things, not handing it off to the Chaos God or either the Moon or nobody, depending on how you interpret Ronnie's ending. Again, it's vague as shit. By the end, I really did feel like a fucking demigod, and I had the power to back that feeling up. Thus, even with the ending itself being a lame copy-paste job, killing the fucking Elden Beast, slapping Goldmask's rune into the ring, and sitting on that throne was immensely, immensely satisfying, even if it could have been much more. This game truly is an epic quest that does reward your perseverance and your time. I love it to bits, and that's precisely why I've been shitting on its shortcomings so hard, because they're so unnecessary. They tarnish an experience that doesn't need to be tarnished. They frustrate to no justifiable end, and they disappoint me. It's clear a huge amount of love and effort went into this game. That love and effort is what caused the game to be so good in the first place, which only makes its stumbling blocks all the more heartbreaking. All I can hope for is that From does not make the same mistakes again. Although if what I've heard about the end of Dark Souls 1 is true, maybe I shouldn't get my hopes up on that.